You've been through these meetings for many years. Have you seen the G20 as divided as it is today over the issue of trade in the past?
Not on the issue of trade, maybe on other issues, yes, there's been divisions, although I would not qualify the current situation as divisive. Rather, different points of view have been put on the table with a common understanding.
What's the common understanding? Because it's our understanding that the rest of the G20 does not agree with the U.S. turn towards protectionism.
There is one common understanding. I don't want to sound too optimistic, but the common understanding is no one wins the trade war. So we need to avoid trade frictions which go beyond the usual dialectics. And so I hope that the U.S., Europe, China, the big players around, will look at the situation and will avoid taking steps that would undermine the global trading system.
Well, we understand Secretary Mnuchin has been trying to turn the conversation towards China and its trading practices, but without a lot of success. Is that correct?
We have been discussing China. We have been discussing, of course, the recent U.S. measures. And as Europeans, we have reiterated that we speak with one voice and we want to avoid any trade friction. And we want to find a solution both to issues with the U.S. and possible issues with China.
Is there a solution?
There's always a solution. There are many solutions. Of course, the question is which one generates the best outcome and over which time horizon. There are, for instance, many colleagues, and I would support that statement, have stated that there is lots to gain in liberalization of services, which for the most part are still not open to global competition.
If I could ask you about Italy, President Mattarella has suggested that he doesn't have a particular timetable for the formation of a new government. So what should investors expect?
Investors should expect a resilient economy which continues to be resilient. The fact that this is not unusual in Europe. We have seen many cases. The latest is one, of course, is Germany, where months were needed to find a stable government. So why should Italy be different?
Would you suggest months are going to be needed in your case, or would we see a new election?
I would anticipate several weeks, maybe a couple of months. New elections are always claimed to be in the background, but I would rule them out at this stage.
How will markets be affected if a government takes a long time to form?
Well, it depends whether this time needed to form the government leads in a clear direction, and there is an implicit assumption that what has been gained in terms of higher growth, sounder public finance and confidence is maintained.
Well, are you optimistic that those conditions will continue?
I'm moderately optimistic, yes.
Moderately doesn't sound like a strong endorsement.
Well, I'm moderately optimistic because I'm still an acting finance minister. I mean, finance ministers have to be prudent with whatever they say.
What do you think your Democratic Party will do? Could it back the center-right or five-star?
The Democratic Party is at the opposition, and I think that the Democratic Party should take seriously the issue of understanding what went wrong, why the party was defeated in spite of the very good job done, if I may say so, over the past legislature. The legislature is ending now.
Well, do you have a preference?
I have a preference for policies that preserve and reinforce actions taken in the past 3 to 4 years.
Well, are any of the possible governments unacceptable?
At this stage, I cannot say something on that.
At this point, do you see anybody who would particularly carry on the work of the Democratic Party?
In individual terms?
In individual terms or party terms?
Party terms, I think that the Democratic Party is starting to have a deep-down discussion among its membership to understand the reasons of the defeat, but also the policy implications. What is the Democratic Party's strategy over the medium term? This is not just an Italian issue, it's an issue across Europe. We have seen the SPD in Germany also witnessing a strong defeat, still being in government, and we have to rethink the social democratic agenda in Europe.
We've seen populist movements in the United States, obviously in the UK, and something of that has happened in Germany and now in Italy. Where does that go from here?
It goes towards redefining and strengthening a strategy for inclusive growth, which has already been started by the outgoing government, but needs to be taken more seriously in terms of resources, efforts. We have done a good job in government. I am honest to say that. The fact is that in many cases, population has not perceived the benefits of lower taxes, higher employment, and higher growth.
Well, do you think that there is something in the populist appeal, say the 5-star, that the PD could work with?
This is a tactical game which is going on. At this stage, I don't see much of that.
What would the Democratic Party say to an appeal for a government of national unity?
We'll see if that proposal comes from President Mattarella.
Is there any possibility that the PD splits over this and that some rebels go with the more populist parties?
Well, unfortunately, a split has already taken place a few months ago, as you know, with the Bersani group leaving the party. So you can never say never.
What would happen, do you think, to the Italian economy or to the markets if 5-star or the League took over?
Well, one should ask the markets. I think that I am moderately confident, that at the end responsibility will prevail, and the fact that Italy needs to further strengthen its public finance, which have greatly improved, will prevail over other projects which may be unsustainable from the point of view of resources and deficit and debt.
If I could move from politics to some policy for a moment. Chancellor Merkel keeps talking about the need for more risk reduction before banking union can be completed. What can Italy do additionally to reassure the Chancellor?
Every time I hear this statement, I ask two questions. How much risk reduction is enough? So we need to agree on that. That's number one. Number two, in any case, certainly a lot of risk reduction has been achieved in Europe, including in Italy. And my view is that we have done a lot more in risk reduction than in risk sharing. Having said that, Italy is reducing risk for her own sake. And let me mention the dramatic fall in NPLs and banks' balance sheets. It's also doing that in public finance terms. Debt over GDP is finally turning around. And structural reforms are producing more sustainable growth. So Italy is doing her part, and I hope other countries do the same.
Have you gotten an answer to your question about how much risk reduction is enough?
The fact is that it's difficult to find a number. We have improved institutions. We have introduced a new banking union regulatory structure. We have done a lot in terms of, as I said, specific banks' balance sheets adjustment and public finance adjustment. There are other countries where maybe more risk reduction could take place.
Given the progress that you've made, would you say it would be wrong to use the word crisis anymore to discuss the Italian banking system? Is the crisis period past?
I think so. Now we are in the reconstruction and sustainability phase. Let's not forget that in addition to dealing with critical situations, in Italy, we have introduced a couple of very important banking sector reforms, the Popolari banks and the small cooperative banks reforms, which will eventually lead to a stronger and more integrated banking system in Italy and therefore in Europe.
I wanted to ask about the Popolari reforms because as soon as today the Constitutional Court may rule on complaints that could put the reform at risk. Are you worried about that? What do you expect?
I expect wisdom as usual from the court. I'm not worried because the implications of the reform has already in any case been carried out. There's only one case, which I will not mention, which is still hanging on, waiting for the pending decision. But this is not going to affect the overall system of Popolari.
Well, would it have consequences for banks that already changed their governance models?
No, I don't think so. And I think at this stage, for the banks that are already adapted to the new framework, it's in their best interest to continue along that path and not go back.
What about litigation risk arising out of this case for banks?
Well, there's always a litigation risk, but I am confident that this will be minimized because the banks are perceiving the benefits of the new regime.